It's been on the year, Oscar season's coming up, so I want to look at every 2023 film that I've watched so far. There's a lot of films that I still want to watch. I still want to watch The Iron Claw, Poor Things, Godzilla Minus One, The Boy and the Heron, Anatomy of a Fall, Society of the Snow. I'm waffling on here. Boston Strangler right here. This was just unbelievably boring in my opinion. I like Keira Knightley. I liked her in... Wasn't she in Love Actually? She's in Love Actually. But I just could not care less for her in this film. The whole Boston Strangler stuff is just so boring. I know it's based on true events, but it's so boring. It's so boring. I didn't mind the first 20 minutes, but then after that, the film just completely lost me. Reptile as well. This is another one where I was invested slightly in the first 20 minutes or so, and then it got so extremely boring. It was just painful to sit through. There was some weird editing moments in this film as well. All the characters in this film were just so boring. I got Ant-Man and Wasp: Quantumania. This is a film that is not great, but I had a better time with it than Reptile and Boston Strangler. Maybe because I saw it in the cinemas. The CGI was terrible, obviously, and you got MODOK. Also, Cassie was just... I'm sorry, but her line delivery is absolutely terrible in this film. You got Jonathan Major, Woman Beater, who plays Kang again, returning from Loki as a variant, and I thought he did a great job. There was some good comedy moments in there, but it's like generic MCU comedy. It's alright. And you got Shazam! Fury of the Gods. This one went down for me. It's one of those films where I watch it, and the more I think about it, I dislike it more and more. Just Billy in this film, though. Why? Like, this whole film is about him turning 18 and maturing and all that, but as soon as he turns into Shazam, he just acts like however old he was in the first film. Zachary Levi's performance just doesn't translate, but there were some fun aspects to this film. The whole family having the Shazam powers was fun. I liked Jack Dylan Grazer. I thought he did a great performance in this film. It's really fun. I like when he's trapped in that, like, the villain's place. That whole side plot was fun. The villains themselves were just so forgettable, but yeah, it was a decent time. And then you got Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This was just a really disappointing final film for Indiana Jones. I thought it was alright. Harrison Ford does another fun performance as Indy in this film. It was just such a slog for most of it, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't really like Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character. I thought she was just really unlikable. It's just very forgettable, which shouldn't be the case for a final Indiana Jones film. I do think the stuff with the dial was fun, and I like where they went with it in the third act, but it was just too late by then. The Bogeyman. I reacted to this on the channel, and it was a fun enough horror film. It's just very generic, not anything special. There were a few jump scares that actually got me, but it's a decent enough horror film. Then you got Renfield. This was a really fun concept for a film. I did really like it, but I didn't think the execution was that great. You've obviously got Nicolas Cage playing Dracula, which is just, come on now. Come on. And I did like Nicholas Hoult as well. He was really fun as Renfield himself. I do really like the over-the-top gore, but I just thought the story was not great, and I don't think the humour was that good as well. I think it should have been better. Then you got Plane. Simply Plane, with Gerard Butler playing a pilot who crashes his plane. This was just a really fun concept, and is executed actually shockingly well. I do think the whole people who lived on the island, like trying to kill them and that, was not really that interesting. I like the whole survival aspect of it a bit more, and the whole plane sequences themselves at the start and the end of the film were just phenomenal. They were just so, like, tense. Operation Fortune, there's one or two Guy Ritchie films that released last year. I thought it was alright. I thought it was pretty good. It's just a fun heist film. Some good comedy. You got a stacked cast. And it's just a fun time. It's pretty forgettable, but it's a fun time, you know. And then you got Extraction 2. I thought Chris Hemsworth did a fun performance in this. There's just some really good action set pieces in this film as well. I just love the long take scene in this film, which the first film did as well. But I thought this film did it even better, I think, probably. Again, though, it is really forgettable. I'm trying to remember stuff from it, and I just can't. Haunting in Venice. This is the third of the Kenneth Branagh, Agatha Christie adaptations, and it's pretty fun. It's definitely my favourite out of the three. The first one I just did not like at all. The second one I thought was a tiny bit better, but this one was actually pretty good. I don't think this film relies on star power, which is a good thing. I thought the whole ghostly aspect of it was fun. I do like Kenneth Branagh's performance in this film as a whole. It is fun. And there's just some really fun cinematography in this film as well. You got some, like, really nice wide shots and that. I do think this film was maybe taking itself a bit too seriously, though. It could have lent a bit more into, like, the goofy nature of the haunting aspect of the film, I guess. Then you got You Hurt My Feelings. This is a film for old people It's definitely a boomer film for boomers. It's very nice, like slice of life romantic comedy, I guess. There's some fun moments in this film. There's some well written comedy here and there. It is very cheesy at points though, and it's just let me show you this comment, because this really just sums up the whole film. This is so live, laugh, love. Then you got The Last Voyage of the Demeter, also known as Dracula on a Boat. This film was just really fun. It's a really fun horror about Dracula on a boat. It doesn't really go beyond that. It was just fun. It ran with that concept, and Dracula on a boat. Then you got No One Will Save You. This film had a really good concept. The characters speak no dialogue throughout the film as well. That was really interesting. I haven't really seen that being done before, and I think it pulled it off really well. The design of the aliens are really creepy, and I think they did that really well as well. You can't really relate to the main character at all because she doesn't speak, but I like the concept. I think the aliens are fun. Yeah, and I kind of like where it goes at the end. And then you got Joyride. This is such a good comedy. Another fun concept. The comedy's very unique, and it's just done so well. It does go a bit over the top at some points, and there are some like dated moments, like the WAP parody, which I mentioned before. And then you got The Equalizer 3. I thought it was a good final film for the Equalizer franchise. You just got Denzel Washington beating up bad guys again. I like the setting. The setting's probably the best out of the whole franchise. And you got Denzel Washington being all smiley and sitting around in coffee shops. There's just some really good action set pieces here. There's some good gore. It's just a fun time. And then you got The Blackening. This is a really fun like parody film. People are comparing it to films like Scary Movie and that. It really feels like one of those early 2000s parody films. The way it plays into tropes and that, it's very self-aware. It's fun. Then you got Cobweb. This is another film with a really fun concept. It is maybe a bit of a copycat from other films. People are comparing it a bit to like Barbarian and that, and it does kind of feel a bit like that, but it really has its own like unique flair to it. You've also got a child being like manipulated by this creature in the walls, which is really interesting. And then when everything goes down in the third act, it's fun. There are some really stupid moments from some characters, like really stupid decisions, but overall it's a really good film. Then you got Blue Beetle. It's just a really solid DCU film. I recently got it on 4K as well from a DCU collection, but I like the origin story of Jaime. The whole Blue Beetle stuff is just really fun. Oh! There was one massive plot hole that pissed me off that I went into in my end of month video, but apart from that, it's a fun superhero film. Then you got Tetris, the origin of Tetris video game. This was a fun time. I thought Taron Egerton did a fun performance. For some reason, it turns into like a Soviet-Russian thriller in some points in this film, which has just completely shocked me. But I don't think they leaned further enough in on either side, and it just feels a bit messy. It's just a messy mix of genres. But it was a very investing time. I was very invested during it. Then you got Totally Killer. This is just a really fun comedy horror, Back to the Future, but slasher. There's just some really fun slasher moments in this film. The main character's not that likable. She's way too quippy, and it just gets on my nerves at points, but it's a fun time. And then you got Inside. This is like Castaway, but in a penthouse. The concept for this film is really great. It's a really uncomfortable watch. Again, it's like Castaway in a penthouse, but it's kind of worse because at least Tom Hanks in Castaway had like water and he'd get food and that. Willem Dafoe has to live without food or water, basically has to eat cat food and that. You literally see all of this in like awful detail. It's a very uncomfortable watch. I don't think I'll watch it again, but I do think it's done very well. It's really slowly paced, but it did keep me invested the whole time. Willem Dafoe does a phenomenal performance in this film as you watch him like slowly go insane. Then you got The Covenant. This is the better Guy Ritchie film that was released last year. I think it worked as like a film of two halves. The first half, Jake Gyllenhaal, I think he gets injured trying to save someone, and then the second half, it turns into Jake Gyllenhaal trying to rescue this guy who saved him in the first half, and that was just really great, and it's just really satisfying at the end. It's a really satisfying ending. Napoleon. This is a very big epic film from Ridley Scott. This is a really good biopic. Joaquin Phoenix does a great performance as Napoleon. The battle scenes in this film are just so epic and grand. They're so expansive and great. I really do love the battle scenes. I do think the middle bit of the film got a bit boring, where you got Napoleon just writing letters and that. This whole relationship with his girlfriend or wife or whatever, it wasn't that investing, but it's just surprisingly well paced. Chicken Run Dawn of the Nuggets. This is a really fun sequel to the first film. It's a little bit more childish than the first film, but I didn't really mind that much. The animation again is great, and there's some good voice acting in there. It's alright. And then you got Maestro. I thought Brad Pitt does a great performance in this film, just a phenomenal performance. I do think the first half of this film was extremely boring and it just felt like painfully obvious Oscar bait. But then the second half like actually got interesting, I feel, and actually tried to tell like a poignant story. Obviously it's a biopic, I think. Again, the story it tries to tell in the second half is really investing. I do think it ended a bit abruptly, but yeah, I really do like the finale. The cinematography is like really good as well. And they got Leave the World Behind. This film had such a good concept and I thought it was executed really well for the first 2 acts, and then the third act I just felt like was really rushed and just came to a really dissatisfying ending, which just really rubbed me the wrong way. I just didn't like it at all. But those first 2 acts, I did really like them. It built up this tension so well of this like incoming terrible thing that's going to happen. It really has this like feeling of dread that I really like. Again though, third act, not great. Then you got KSI in real life. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really like KSI as much as I did when I watched this documentary. After the whole Logan Paul situation and that, and him defending Logan and all that, obviously because they're friends and the whole stuff with Prime and that. But this documentary is really well done. It does really show KSI in a completely different light to how I've seen him before. I like the whole reuniting with his dad stuff. That was really well done. I like how it shows his touring life and all that. It's a decent documentary. Then you got The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I thought was a really good prequel to the Hunger Games films for the first 2 acts anyway, first 2 parts of the film, I guess. I like how it builds up to the Hunger Games here, and I like how Snow helps Snow White's character, and then when the actual Hunger Games goes down and that, it feels really threatening, and I do think it's done really well. I thought the third part was just really boring. You got Snow looking like Eminem crossed with Chris Martin. I just found it really boring how he worked his way out of the districts and that, and just ended up being right back where he started from. It felt a little bit pointless. I just think the third part was just really messy. Megan, this was just such a fun horror comedy. The concept of this like AI doll who starts terrorizing everyone and becoming evil is such a fun concept. You got a bit of James Wan flair to it as well because he produced it. The third act just goes into absolute like James Wan craziness. It is very predictable. It plays into a lot of tropes, but it's so unbelievably fun. Reality, this is a very like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a bottle episode of like a show where it's like in this one location for the whole film, and it surprisingly kept me engaged for the whole runtime. Sydney Sweeney's performance in this was just so engaging, like her different facial reactions, you can just see her processing different stuff that these police officers are saying to her, and she just does a phenomenal performance in this. You're just hanging off every line of dialogue said in this film. Elemental, this is just a very solid Pixar film. It's not Pixar's best, obviously. Again, like a few other films here, it's very generic, it's very predictable, but in a good way. I liked the relationship between the fire and the water people and that. You obviously got to have a racist father in there as well. Very nice. And the animation's obviously really good. It's what you're expecting from Pixar. Yeah, I really liked it. Right, so I'm recording this like a week later and I'm very ill, so apologies if I cough or sniff and that. Look at the Cabin. It's a pretty good M. Night Shyamalan film. The ending, I would like it to be expanded on a bit more, but the concept is great. And you got Ron Weasley in there. Then you got the Grand Tour Euro Crash. This is a pretty fun special. Obviously you got Jeremy Clarkson again, bit of Jeremy Clarkson, James May, Richard Hammond. It's just a very, very fun time. I'm not the biggest fan of how some things are like over exaggerated or how there's some completely made up bits for the sake of entertainment. It just feels very out of place. Cocaine Bear, I might have rated this too high. I don't know, but I just had a really fun time with this. It just has a really fun concept and just completely runs with it. I've heard people say that it focuses on the human characters too much, but I actually like the human characters. I just found them to be fun, along with the Cocaine Bear. The Flash, this might be a bit controversial to have it this high, but I really enjoyed this film. The CGI is absolutely god-awful, obviously, but I think the story is actually like really poignant and avoiding all like the cameos and the fan service and all that. It has a really good story at the heart of it. Ezra Miller, they're not the best person. I thought they did a great job at playing Barry Allen. And you've also got Michael Keaton back, and I love Michael Keaton, and his Batman is just as great as always, although I don't really like what they did with him in the third act. It's kind of disappointing, but there's a lot of disappointing moments in this film, but there's a lot of
great moments in this film. Infinity Pool, it might be the weirdest film I watched this year. I don't know, maybe Beau's Afraid. I thought Alexander Skarsgård did a great performance in this. It was a very interesting concept, to with cloning and how rich people take advantage of stuff like that. It's pretty well paced. Again though, it's very weird. Gran Turismo, this is a very surprisingly good biopic. There's some really good cinematography in this film. When the racing scenes are going on, it just looks great. I thought the main character, it's not the best performance, but it's a very engaging performance. And then also you got David Harbour as this very likeable mentor figure. It's just a very engaging biopic. The Killer, this is a really good David Fincher film. I thought Michael Fassbender did a really good performance as this like threatening, very calm and calculated person, and it really comes across in his performance. His unstoppable nature, he doesn't connect with any of these people, he just does his job. It's such a good performance in that way. I don't think the story is as engaging as I would have liked it to be, but it's a very solid film. Saw X, I was very surprised by this. I've only seen the first two Saw films, and this one takes place between 1 and 2, so it is very interesting how they've done that and brought John Kramer back, who's a character that I really liked in the first two Saw films, but they didn't focus on him enough. So I really like how they made him like the main character in this film, and more of like an anti-hero, which is very fun. The traps in this film are really creative as well, as always from Saw. There's some really funny kills, and the twists and turns this film takes just makes for such a fun time. Sisu, this was another very fun time. It's very gory, it's got a lot of themes of revenge. Yeah, it's just a guy killing a bunch of Nazis for however long this film is, and it just pulls it off very, very well. Asteroid City, this is a very good Wes Anderson film. Again, very stylized, obviously in the Wes Anderson style. I do think it gets a bit convoluted with the plot, with like the black and white segments and the colour segments. It is a little bit confusing, but I like the whole stuff in the Asteroid City world and all the stories going on with the characters in that world and how they develop the characters and that. The whole stuff with the aliens is fun. Yeah, it's just very well paced. Again, the black and white stuff with like the Astro City play and the actors involved with it is very weird. There's a lot of symbolism going on that I wasn't the biggest fan of, but it's a good film. No Hard Feelings, this is just a really just solid raunchy comedy that feels like it's just taken straight out of the late 2000s. It just has that humour and it's just so fun. The concept is fun. There's just some genuinely just really funny moments. Jennifer Lawrence just plays this character so well. Wham, this is a really good documentary on like the rise and I guess fall of Wham. It's not really a fall because they just decided to break up and they did a farewell concert and that, but I'm a big fan of Wham and George Michael, so this is a very interesting documentary because I didn't really know much about like, the beginnings of George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley. It's just a very well edited documentary as well. Black Mirror Beyond the Sea. This is not really a film, it's an episode of Black Mirror obviously, but I'm going to count it as a film since it's like an hour and 20 minutes, so it's basically film length. This has such an interesting concept with these spacemen who go in like these pods and they've got a robot version of themselves on Earth, and where the story goes with that is great. Missing, this is a pretty good sequel to Searching, which I really loved. I really loved Searching, and this is a pretty good sequel. Again, like Searching, the whole only being like shot through a computer screen is such a good, unique style, and it surprisingly keeps me intrigued throughout the whole thing. You've obviously got the mother going missing and the daughter trying to find out where she went through all these apps and websites and that. Yeah, it's surprisingly very, very intriguing throughout the whole runtime. I do think where it goes in the third act is a bit over the top and it could have been toned down a bit, but overall it's a very solid sequel. Creed 3, another very solid sequel. You got Michael B. Jordan directing and acting in this film. I think he does a great job. I just like all the Creed films, they've just been really solid, and this third one is just no exception. I like the rivalry between his character and Jonathan Major's character, and there's a lot of unique style in this film that wasn't really in the first two Creed films as well, which is very welcome. It like spices up the fight scenes a bit more, which I like. Theatre Camp, this is a very good like mockumentary style comedy, and it's just very fun. You got a lot of you just got a lot of characters in this film. They like bounce off each other really well, and the whole stuff with the theatre camp and the backstory behind it and all that, it's very well built out, and there's also a lot of good humour in this film, even though some of it isn't really my type of humour. Thanksgiving, this is a surprisingly good slasher. It is a little bit predictable, but it's just a very memorable slasher in my opinion. That like opening sequence with Black Friday and that, it's one of the most like memorable sequences of a horror film that I've seen this year probably. It's so over the top and crazy. I just really loved it. And then the whole stuff after that is really fun. It's like a murder mystery thing like Scream, and it's done really well. Some really good kills in it, some really good gore. There are some like genuinely disturbing moments as well, especially during the dinner scene. Then you got Scream 6. Probably not going to get Scream 7 now after everything that's happened, but this is a really good sequel. Ghostface is probably the most threatening we've seen him in this film. The kills in this film are probably most brutal out of the whole franchise. I just blew a bubble out my mouth then. I like how meta the Scream films can get, and there's a lot of meta moments in this film. And obviously the whole murder mystery stuff is just really, really, really fun, like every other Scream film. And there are some moments where I genuinely thought they were going to kill off legacy characters. There's just so many twists and turns in this film that I really loved. Oh yeah, there God, it's me, Margaret. This is a very good coming of age, slice of life comedy kind of. There's just some really good performances in this film, especially from the girl who plays Margaret. I really like the period setting as well. You just got some really solid performances in here. And then you got Black Mirror Joan is Awful. This is another very interesting Black Mirror concept that's done really well. It is much more of a comedy than other Black Mirror episodes, and it works really well as a comedy, surprisingly. It's just another really good concept. Some things are a little bit stupid, but I don't care. You got Salma Hayek like hamming it up. It gets super meta at the end as well, and I just loved it. Priscilla, this is another really good biopic. This might be better than Elvis 2022. It's just very well shot, and it tells the story of Elvis's wife really well. It's very interesting seeing how they fell in love and obviously how they broke up. Shin Kamen Rider. I feel like no one saw this film apart from me. Only 25k people have watched it on Letterboxd, which in terms of Letterboxd numbers, it's not very much. But it was on Amazon Prime and it looked very interesting. It was surprisingly good. The CGI does look a bit goofy and disturbing in moments, and there are some very confusing moments that happen near the end, but overall the story's really interesting. With the whole concept of like the bug, all these bug creatures and that. Invisible Adam Eve, this is a really good like prequel obviously to Invincible. It's really interesting seeing like the origins of Adam Eve. I think the animation is improved over season 1, and there's just some really good action in here. The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. This is not really a film, but I've got it in there. It's one of the 4 Wes Anderson specials, and this was really solid. I kind of liked it more than Asteroid City. I actually read the story for this years ago because I had like a rolled up book full of his short stories and that, and this was in it. And this is a really good story. It's just a very interesting concept. You got Benedict Cumberbatch narrating the whole thing basically. I like how it feels like a play as well, with all these like moving sets. It's just such an interesting way to tell this story. Beau is Afraid, like I mentioned, I think this is the weirdest film I've seen this year, but in a good way. It just has this really like lingering feeling of dread that I just felt throughout the whole film, and everything is obviously going on inside Beau's mind. A lot of stuff is like over exaggerated, and it just really brings you into the headspace of this character. There's so much symbolism in this film. When you get into the third act, that symbolism just gets more and more abstract to the point where I don't even know how to interpret anything anymore. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because a lot of people can interpret the film in different ways and that. Yeah, it's a very interesting film, and it surprisingly kept me engaged for the 3 hours that it ran for as well. Air. This is a surprisingly good biopic. Again, very good biopic about how the Nike shoe was like created and happened with Michael Jordan there. I like the whole business aspect of it, seeing into this business and how one ambitious person managed to completely revive this company. It's just a very good biopic. The Creator, I really like this. I like this way more than I was expecting to. I thought the sci-fi concept for this was great with the robots and all that. The main character isn't that engaging or likable, but everything else going around this character is just so good. The story that is built out is great, and it's a surprisingly emotional ending as well. Wonka, this is a really good prequel to the Gene Wilder film. Timothy Chalamet does a really like wondrous performance, I guess, as Willy Wonka, and the story just has a lot of charm and whimsy to it, which Paul King manages to bring to all of his films really. Dungeons and Dragons. This is another film that really surprised me. This has such a likeable bunch of main characters that are built out really well. This whole fantasy world is also built out really well, and it's just so fun. Evil Dead Rise. This is such a solid addition to the Evil Dead franchise. The gore in this film is absolutely like balls to the walls insane. It's so over the top that it's just amazing. I love it. I like the dark humour of it as well, and the whole possession stuff and where it leads to. It's just so great. It's just such a crazy film. Rye Lane. This is another surprisingly great film. The cinematography of this film is so good. The shots in this film just feel so like lively, and the colour grading just makes everything seem so vibrant. It's just a very simple story about these two people falling in love, but it's done so well. The script is great, and there's just some really fun and memorable moments in this film. Talk to Me. The Wrecker brothers just managed to make such a solid horror film, which I wasn't expecting from two YouTubers. Like Beau's Afraid, it has this really lingering feeling of dread and horror, and there are some genuinely really disturbing moments in this film. They just know how to make a horror film, really. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. This is a really solid addition to the Mission Impossible franchise. There's so many great action set pieces in this film, and the story with the AI is really great as well. It's just a great story, great action set pieces, great acting. They Clone Tyrone. There's another film with a very, very great concept, which is executed almost perfectly in my opinion. It feels very much like a blaxploitation film. It really brings you back to like the 70s with the style and even the grain on the film. There's a lot of twists and turns in this film, and it's a film that I could rewatch and like appreciate in a whole different way. Saltburn. This is a film that some people really like, some people really hate, mostly because of some of the very explicit sequences in this film, which I do think go on for a bit too long. But overall, I think it's a really solid film. Barry Keoghan does a great performance, and it's so interesting seeing how his character like turns and develops over the course of the film. The cinematography is just so great as well, and where this film goes in the third act is just pretty shocking. Nimona. This film has such a great story, a great concept, some really good writing, and some genuinely like funny moments that made me laugh. I don't really like the animation that look much. It looks just off. There's something about it that looks off in my opinion, but it's a very solid film. Bottoms, probably the funniest film of last year. Such a solid comedy. I just love how absurd it is. It gets way too absurd at the end, but in a good way. May December, you got two phenomenal performances in this film. There's just so many uncomfortable moments in this film where you don't know how a character is going to react to something, and it just adds so much tension to this film, which just lingers. I love how it delves into all these characters as well, and how stuff like this like mentally affects people. Blackberry. This is a really like amazing biopic. I love the mockumentary style. There's so many stressful moments in this film which are just shot so well. Again, with the mockumentary style, it just adds so much tension to the film. All of these characters are so likeable as well, and you're all rooting for them, and it's just so devastating when this company inevitably comes crashing down. Now we're getting into this top 10 with Past Lives. I love the concept of this film. It's such like a heartwarming and heartbreaking film. The story is just told so well. Barbie, the biggest film of last year probably. I love the style to this film from Greta Gerwig. It's just become iconic at this point. All the songs, all of the comedic sequences between Barbie and Ken, and it has some surprisingly emotional moments in it. Dream Scenario, Nick Cage puts in probably the best performance I've seen from him in this film. Again, I've said this a million times, but the concept is so good. It's probably one of the most original and unique concepts I've seen from this year, and where it goes with that concept is so good and interesting. It works very well as like a dark comedy as well. There's some really funny moments in this film that genuinely made me laugh. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. I love the animation in this film. I love the voice actors and how the characters just bounce off each other so well. There's some amazing action sequences in this film that just go so hard. Oppenheimer, another one of the biggest films this year. This is such a good film from Christopher Nolan, such a good biopic. It's so interesting seeing the rise and fall of Oppenheimer and how he managed to build something so destructive. There's some like really well shot sequences, some really disturbing moments in this film, and you've also got an amazing performance from Cillian Murphy as well, obviously. Killers of the Flower Moon, a phenomenal film from Martin Scorsese. It's 3.5 hours, which is a shocking length for a film, but I was literally engaged for the whole runtime, which I was not expecting. I love the relationship between these two characters, and where the story goes is just so devastating. John Wick Chapter 4, I absolutely love this film. As you can see, we're getting into 5-star territory here. It's such a good conclusion to the John Wick franchise. The action scenes in this film were just so phenomenal. Probably the best action I've seen in a film ever. How it's shot and everything is just so good. I like how it develops John Wick's character in this film from the previous films, and it leaves everything on such a interesting final note. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was another perfect film in my opinion. I saw this in cinemas. It's such an epic finale to the trilogy. I just love how it concludes everything. I love how it delves into Rocket's backstory and how he's brought up, and there's just some proper emotional moments involved with this character in this film which are so well done. I like how things come back around in the final act as well, and it leaves everything off in such a satisfying way. The Holdovers, I love this film. It's probably my favourite Christmas film now. It just feels like such a cozy film. I know a lot of people have described it like that. I love the relationship between this student and the teacher, and I see Paul Giamatti's character's personality start to shine through more and more as the film goes on. The third act is just so satisfying. And then number one, obviously we got Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I watched this film twice last year, which I don't really do a lot. I don't really watch a film twice in the same year, but I did it with this film because it was so good. I love it built on Miles' character. All the new characters introduced are so great. You got Miguel, who's such a great villain. You got a bunch of twists and turns, especially in the end, which are done so well. The reveals are done so well. Obviously the animation is phenomenal. Some of the best animation I've seen ever. It's almost on the same level as Into the Spider-Verse. Into the Spider-Verse is like one of my favourite films of all time. It's like an 11 out of 10, but this film is pretty close. It's so good. So those are all the films I watched this year. I've watched 82 films. Wow.